Good evening, everybody, to all those who are here and to all those who are joining us online, and especially with today's weather. We definitely have some extra pizza here, and if you're joining us online, welcome. We are discussing tonight, everything you think about yourself is probably wrong. Let somebody else make the calls. So I want to just begin by saying that in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, there are obligations, there are responsibilities, and that's where things begin and things end. In other words, in Yiddishkeit, when we talk about positioning, posturing for positions in religious life, it's not based on rights. Oh, I have a right. It's based on obligations. What is your obligation according to the Torah? So I say that as an introduction to the story in this week's Parsha with regard to the 5 daughters of Tzlafchad. The 5 daughters of Tzlafchad came to petition Moshe Rabbeinu to say that they weren't going to inherit a portion of Eretz Yisrael. And the reason for that is because they have no brothers, and they're just a family of 5 daughters, and this would not be. This seems to be incorrect. This seems to be something that would need to be something needs to be different. It has something is off in how this is being applied, how the law is being applied. So I gave that introduction so that we should understand that in Torah, with regard to inheritance is the males inherit. Now today, it's something that's enacted for many hundreds of perhaps thousands of years, that there's a way to inherit to your daughter as well. It's not a contradiction. You could do that if you want to, but min ha-Torah, biblically speaking, the sons inherit. And the sons, in fact, have the obligation to support their sister. You have an obligation to support your sister until she gets married. And the idea, of course, is that once the woman becomes married, so now her husband takes care of her, and I think women like to be taken care of. So that happens to be the way Hashem, in His ultimate divine wisdom, mandated that it be. So what happens? You have 5 daughters, Tzlafchad's daughters, 5 sisters. And they come over to Moshe and they say something is off, something is wrong, because our family is not going to have any portion of Eretz Yisrael because our father died in the Midbar. Here's what it says over here in text number 1. The daughters of Tzlafchad, the son of Chefer, the son of Gilad, the son of Machir, the son of Menashe, of the families of Menashe, the son of Yosef, came forward. And his daughters' names were Machla, Noya, Chagla, Milka, and Tirza. They stood before Moshe and before Elazar the Kohen, the high priest, and before the chieftains and the entire congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, our father died in the desert, but he was not in the assembly that banded together against God and Korach's assembly, but he died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should our father's name be eliminated from his family because he had no son? Give us a portion along with our father's brothers. At least along with the father's brothers, together with the father's brothers, there should be some zecher, some semblance, some remembrance of our father. So Moshe brought their case before Hashem. God spoke to Moshe saying, Tzlafchad's daughters speak justly. You shall certainly give them a portion of inheritance along with their father's brothers, and you shall transfer their father's inheritance to them. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a man dies and has no son, you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. So this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, that when there's no son, then the inheritance goes to the daughter. Question: why didn't Moshe deliberate over this question first? It just says, so Moshe brought their case before God, as if Moshe had nothing to say, as if Moshe had nothing to contribute to this conversation. Certainly, after 40 years of teaching Torah to all of his, to all of the Jewish people and to his students and to the great sages of the time, certainly Moshe had enough wherewithal and so had enough resources, enough knowledge to be able to render a judgment in this case. Why in this case suddenly, I got to go to God, I have to ask Hashem? Why? What's the reason? And Hashem's answer, you might think, is very simple. Very, very simple. If you got a man doesn't have any sons, only has daughters, so give it to his daughter. Moshe couldn't figure that out. The great genius Moshe, who was the greatest human being who lived, the greatest prophet who ever lived, he couldn't figure out this very simple halacha that when a man dies without any other sons, he only has daughters, then what is he supposed to do? Oh, give it to the daughters. Was Moshe really thinking that the daughters should be destitute, should be penniless, without any property, without anything? They weren't married. So, why was this something that had to be brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's attention, quote, and not have it adjudicated and decided by Moshe himself? So there are two interpretations that go in two different directions. Number one, we have the basic, straightforward understanding of this in Rashi, text number 2. So Moshe brought their case, says Rashi, the law eluded him. The law eluded Moshe. Nis'almo mimenu halacha, which means he just forgot it. He didn't know what the law was. So now, says Rashi, he was punished here for an earlier episode when he crowned himself with authority, saying, and the case that is too difficult for you, bring to me. When it came to establishing the tiers of judges amongst the Jewish people, so Moshe says, the case that you can't figure it out, so then you come to me. You crown yourself with such honor like that, so says Hashem, there's going to be a time when you're not going to remember the halacha. Okay. Another interpretation, this passage ought to have been written through Moshe, but Slavchad's daughters were meritorious, so it was written through them. Because they were meritorious, so therefore the Torah has it written under Slavchad's daughters. In other words, gives credit to Slavchad's daughters. They're the ones who prompted this halacha to come about. Really, Moshe would have shared this halacha also. I just want to mention in passing that this verse here, this statement right over here that Rashi mentions in the second interpretation, that the reason why this happened was in order that Slavchad's daughters who were meritorious be credited with the study, with the revelation of this halacha, is brought down as a source for the principle or for the statement of our sages, which is that mitzvah lefarsem oisem mitzvah. Which means that when there's somebody who does a mitzvah, somebody who's righteous, and they do something good, they should be publicized. It should be publicized that they are the ones credited for the mitzvah. So this incident here, and this interpretation of the incident specifically, that Slavchad's daughters were meritorious, and therefore the Torah wants to give them credit, that's one of the bases, one of the foundations, one of the sources for this idea, the mitzvah lefarsim meisa mitzvah, which is the idea, of course, of putting up plaques in a shul or writing a person's name on anything in the shul that they donated. Why shouldn't it just be anonymous? No, we want people to know about it. Why do we want people to know about it? So that people continue giving, so that people support, so that people grant, that people are generous. Okay. Another example of somebody who spoke haughtily and therefore was punished was Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi in text number 3a. We have the story here where King Saul, at that point he wasn't yet King Saul, was searching for his father's camels. And, he was searching for his father's donkeys. Searching for his father's donkeys, they were lost. And they directed him to go to the seer, to go to the prophet. So he comes to the city, and he says, "I'm looking for the prophet," and he's actually talking to the prophet himself, to Shmuel HaNavi. So what does Shmuel HaNavi answer? He says, "Anochi haroya." I am the prophet, says Shmuel. In text number 3a, and Shmuel answered Shaul, and he said, "I am the seer, and you shall eat with me today, and I shall send you away in the morning, and all that is on your mind I shall tell you." Wow. So he's broadcasting and he's telling everybody what he's able to do. He's able to tell what he's thinking. He's able to see everything. So what's the punishment that Shmuel meets because of this? Then when it came time to anoint King David, he made a mistake. Initially he thought that his older brother Eliav should be the one who should be anointed, and he didn't pick the right one. So in text number 3b, we read from the Radak, Rav David Kimchi. By the way, his name is David Kimchi, and they say about him that his commentary is so important that he's like kemach, he's like the flour about which the Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the father, says that if you don't have flour, it means kemach in Torah, meaning if you don't have sustenance, then you don't have Torah. So if you don't have kimchi, if you don't have the Radak, then you can't really learn Tanakh. So that's how essential his commentary is to learning Tanakh and understanding Tanakh. So in text number 3b, page number 7, our sages of blessed memory stated that Shmuel blundered here, for he should have said, "Ask others," or the like. God said, "You claim to be the seer? Well, I will show you that you are not the seer." When did God show him? When God instructed Shmuel to go to the house of Yishai, David's father, in Beis Lechem, and Shmuel beheld Eliyav, David's older brother, David HaMelech's older brother. So Hashem told Shmuel, "Did you not say you are the seer? Well, do not look to his appearance." Because of his appearance, Shmuel thought that this was the right one. But it was the wrong one. And that would be something you would expect Shmuel to know better.
But he's human, so why wouldn't...
but he's a seer.
But still, prophecy is not 100%.
I think in this case, it seems like from the teaching that it is. From this teaching, the fact that that the retribution was that he wouldn't see in one case, and God is speaking to him and telling him, the reason for this is because you said that you're the seer. It would seem like this is the anomaly. This is the one that's out of the ordinary. Okay, now going back to the explanation for Moshe Rabbeinu, what exactly was the reason why Moshe had to go to Hashem to ask him for the halacha? So the Medrash actually has another explanation in text number 4. Reish Lakish said, Moshe really knew this law, but deferred to God because initially the case was presented in the court of judges for 10. These judges said, this is a matter of estate law, and it is not within our jurisprudence. We will defer it to a greater court. The daughters then presented their case to the judges of 50, and they saw how the judges of 10 afforded the women such honors, so they too said, there is a greater court than us. The judges of hundreds did the same, as did the judges of thousands and the tribunal princes. They all gave a similar answer, not wishing to rule in a matter ahead of a greater court. So they went before Elazar the high priest, and he said, Moshe, our master, is here. Go to him. They all came before Moshe. Moshe saw how everyone had demonstrated respect to the greater party, and said, if I render the ruling, I will be taking the greatness for myself. So he said to them, there is someone yet greater than me. Thus Moshe brought their case before Hashem. So the Medrash has a completely different interpretation of how this all panned out. It wasn't that Moshe had said in the past, because kol hadavar hagol, anything that you're not going to be able to figure out, you bring to me. So it was an expression of haughtiness. At least that was the way it was interpreted. Here, it actually is an expression of humility, because all the lower courts refused to rule, because there's a higher court. Now, don't ask me why they didn't want to rule because of the higher court specifically in this case. What about all the other cases? But regardless, let's put that question on the side. All of them were saying there's a higher court. So when it came to Moshe, Moshe was like, there's a higher court than me too. Everybody's coming here because there's a higher court. Let's ask Hashem. Good evening. We have a whole pizza for you. So here, before we go to another explanation, we want to explore how objective human beings really are about themselves and about others. How objective are they? Can we really be objective? Can we really rise above our own biases, rise above our own internal conflicts and tension and internal, assumptions that we've made in the past that we feel we were obligated to continue following and believing in? Can we rise above them? Can we, in effect, extricate ourselves from that web that we've created for ourselves? Can we be objective and not really be all the time following the path that we've kind of trodden for ourselves? We've charted out a path, and this is the way we go about things, that we always say to ourselves or say to others, in effect, don't confuse me with the facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. I don't want to know about the facts. I just want to know I want to know, is it the way I want it, the way I like it, or not? We have this all the time in politics. We have it we have it a lot of times in religion as well. So here's a fascinating teaching from the Talmud in Sanhedrin that teaches us just how far we need to go, just how concerned we have to be with the slightest level of bias when it comes to Jewish law. In Tractate Sanhedrin, we read about making a year a leap year. So the text says as follows, in text number 5a, page 10, the king may not be given a seat on the Sanhedrin, nor may the king or the high priest be members of the panel for their intercalation of the year. The king, on account of Asfanya, and we're going to see what Asfanya means, he says over here, the upkeep of the military, and the high priest because of the cold. So these two individuals, the priest, the high priest, and the king, are not allowed to be on the Sanhedrin. Why? Because they have something that creates a bias within them. There's something within this decision-making process that will have either a benefit for them or serve to their detriment. Even in the minutest form, and we're going to see how. In text number 5b, we read from Rashi, what does Asfanya mean? We said the king, on account of Asfanya, can't be part of the Sanhedrin. What is Asfanya? So Rashi tells us, on account of Asfanya, the king pays the soldiers a fixed amount for the entire year, and he would prefer that every year be intercalated. In other words, the king pays by the year. If they add another month to the year, voila, it's beautiful, great. I get another month of service out of my soldiers. I get another year of duty out of all my workers, all my soldiers, without having to pay an extra penny. And now I can go on vacation with that extra cash. What do you mean? Vacation is nothing? Hawaii, the Bahamas,
Eilat.
Eilat.
Yeah.
Okay, I can think of a couple other spots.
Tel Aviv.
So saving that money, that's a pretty big reason to vote a certain way. Therefore, says the Mishnah and the Gemara, that we do not allow a king to sit on the Sanhedrin for this very reason. What about the high priest? What about the Kohen Gadol? What's wrong with that Kohen Gadol? Kohen Gadol is the representative of all the Jewish people in the temple on Yom Kippur, and he atones for everybody's sins. Why would he not be a fair arbiter in the Beis HaMikdash? Why he's in the Beis HaMikdash? Why can't he serve on the Bezdin? Why can't he serve on the Sanhedrin? So it's fascinating. Watch this. The high priest, he does not wish for the year to be intercalated. He has the opposite agenda. Not like the king who wants it to be intercalated. He wants it not to be intercalated. He doesn't want there to be any leap year. Why? Because of the cold. For he needs to wash his hands and feet 10 times and dip in the mikveh 5 times on Yom Kippur. He doesn't want to have a freezing cold Yom Kippur. He doesn't want to get sick. If the year is intercalated, the month of Tishrei and the holiday of Yom Kippur will be observed deeper in the autumn, most likely resulting in cold weather. Now, Tosfos counters Rashi's explanation, and he says in text number 5c, he says, because of the cold, Rashi explains that it is because the high priest is required to dip in the mikvah on Yom Kippur. This is not plausible, for we learn in Tractate Yuma that they would heat up an urn of water for the high priest on Yom Kippur. Says Tosfos, therefore I don't accept Rashi's interpretation. It seems more plausible to explain that the high priest was wary of the floor being cold, for he would stand barefoot all day on Yom Kippur.
Really?
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah. The Kohanim had to go barefoot.
Did they have a pad or something underneath? Like cloth? Anything?
No.
Wow. Just on the
They actually had a resident doctor in the Beis HaMikdash to deal with all the ailments that the Kohanim would come down with, I should say. Yeah. So here we have it. Tosfos is telling us that why can't the Kohen Gadol, why can't the high priest serve on the Sanhedrin? Because of the minutest of concerns. The minutest of concerns is that one day a year, the Kohen Gadol is going to have to walk barefoot on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash, and we're concerned that by intercalating the year, it's going to be a month ahead, and then what? It's going to be cold. Kohen Gadol doesn't want it to be cold. So he's going to vote the other way.
Wow.
So just because of this minute concern that on one day a year the Kohen Gadol, don't forget he's a Kohen Gadol the whole year, but because there's one day a year that he's worried about the cold. So over here we're concerned. Over here we're not going to. So therefore we're not going to allow the Kohen Gadol to serve on the Sanhedrin at all.
So just that he has potential subconscious tendency to maybe skew the decision one way or another, even
Exactly.
if it's conscious or not. Therefore, we don't want to put him in that position.
Because he has the subconscious ability to skew the decision-making process. Absolutely.
Yeah, but those two people, you have the Sanhedrin was 72 people, so it wouldn't sway the
I know.
vote.
71.
71.
71, yeah. So he can't be that one. It had to be an odd number. So that you could have a decision, one way or another. So clearly they had some vested interest here. How much of a vested interest? Very, very minute. But because of that very minute vested interest, the Chazal tell us, sorry dude, you can't serve on the Sanhedrin. So basically from the perspective of Yiddishkeit, from where Yiddishkeit stands, we need to be super careful and super concerned about our own biases. We have to recognize how small we are, how pathetic we could be, and how meshuchad. How do we say meshuchad in English? Meshuchad is sheichad. How bribed we could be by something so minimal, so unimportant, such as having to walk barefoot for one day a year.
So that means that it's very difficult to find people that would be impartial in the Sanhedrin.
That's true. It wasn't an easy task to find people for the Sanhedrin. It wasn't just a matter of academic know-how. To serve in the Sanhedrin, it wasn't just a matter of knowing a lot. To serve in the Sanhedrin, you had to be somebody who was extremely pious. You had to have a reputation of being extremely pious and also very knowledgeable. So that's why it wasn't so easy to create such people. At some point, it had to stop. So they tell a story about a man who was involved in a trial with staggering sums of money at stake. So he meets with his lawyer, and his lawyer tells him, "I can't do anything about it. It seems like it's in the hands of the judge. We just have to let it roll. We have to let things pan out." So he says to him, "Maybe I could send him a small package of cash with some whiskey or something." So the lawyer says, No, you can't send, that would be bribing. And the judge would dismiss the case, he would rule against you, just for the notion that he could be bought off with bribery. So the guy says, "Okay, thank you. Appreciate you sharing with me that piece of information." And a couple days later, the judgment arrives, and he's completely vindicated. So he turns to his lawyer and he says, "Thank you, sir. I appreciate all the good advice. Thank you for telling me about that, the whiskey and the cash." So he says, "What are you talking about? I told you not to send it." He said, "Yeah, very simple. I sent it, but I put my opponent's name on it." So the judge thought that it was all right. So when it comes to bribery could come in all forms, or many forms, I should say. The Torah says, "Hashechet ya'aver einei chachamim." Hashechet, bribery, ya'aver, will blind einei chachamim, the eyes of the wise. In other words, we're talking about people who the Torah refers to as wise. When the Torah refers to somebody as wise, he's truly wise. We're talking about a truly wise individual. But because shechet, bribery, is so insidious in that it gets into the subconsciousness of the person's mind, and even without realizing it, the person starts to come up with all kinds of rationalizations for why that individual is right. Because they have something to benefit. There is something to benefit. So here's an incredible story that the Talmud tells us in text number 6. Our rabbis taught. The verse states, "You shall not accept a bribe." Prohibiting money, bribes, is unnecessary, for the verse does not use the words, "and you shall take no betza," monetary gain. Rather, the language of the verse comes to prohibit even a verbal bribe. In other words, it's not just taking betzah. It doesn't say you shall take no betzah. You shall take no actual money. It says you shall not accept a bribe. What constitutes a bribe? What constitutes a bribe? It could be a package of money. It could be a wad of cash. Or it could be verbal bribery. Verbal bribery is also bribery. So, what exactly is a verbal bribe, says the Talmud? Take the incident of Shmuel. He was once crossing a river on a board when a man came along and offered him his hand. Shmuel asked him, "What brings you here?" "I have a lawsuit," the other replied. Shmuel immediately replied, "I recuse myself from judging your case." He helped him out with the board. What did he do for him already? Amemar once was sitting and deciding a law when a bird flew on top of his head, whereby a man came along and removed it. "What brings you here?" Amemar asked him. "I have a lawsuit," the other replied. Amemar replied, "I am disqualified from acting as your judge." That's it. That's the end. I can't be your judge now. Mar Ukva once ejected some saliva, he expectorated, and a man came by and covered it. "What brings you here?" Mar Ukva asked him. "I have a lawsuit," said the man. Mar Ukva replied, "I am disqualified from acting as your judge." Now here's the kicker. Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, had a sharecropper who used to bring him a basket full of fruit every Friday. So in other words, he would do the sharing, and he would bring him some of the fruit from his own field. We're talking about fruit that Rabbi Yishmael owned. It's just that this individual had rights to some of the fruit because he would do the cropping. So what did he do? He would normally bring the fruits to Rabbi Yishmael on every Friday. One time he brought it to him on a Thursday. Rabbi Yishmael asked him why the change. So he said, "I have a lawsuit," the other replied, and thought that at the same time I might bring the fruit to the master. In other words, Thursday was a good day to come in from the towns and the villages which were outside of the big cities. Don't forget, most people had to live in these kind of places in order to earn a living. They had to have a farm. So you had to live there, and you also had to come into the big city to sell your wares or whatever it is. So they would come in on Thursdays and on Mondays. So why is he coming on Thursday? Because he has a lawsuit, not by Rabbi Yishmael. He has a lawsuit elsewhere by some other judge. So he figured, let me bring it to him a little early, so I don't have to schlep in another time. Rabbi Yishmael did not accept it from him and said, "I am disqualified to act as your judge." I'm sorry, the way I interpreted it before was I have a lawsuit, meaning by some other judge. No, he meant that I have to come for a lawsuit by you. So Rabbi Yishmael didn't accept it because he said, "I'm disqualified to act as your judge because all you did for me was you brought me the fruit. Instead of 24 hours later, you brought it 24 hours earlier." He thereupon appointed a couple of rabbis to try the case for him. So Rabbi Yishmael had a couple of other rabbis sit in instead of him. And he's listening to the way the case is unfolding. As he was arranging the affair, he found himself thinking, if he wished, he could plead thus, or if he preferred, he might plead thus. "Oh," he exclaimed, "the despair that waits for those who take bribes. If I, who have not taken the fruit at all, and even if I had taken it, I would only have taken what is really mine, am in such a state of mind, how much more would it be the state of those who accept actual bribes?" Rabbi Yishmael was saying, if I am sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, you know what he could say? He could use this argument, he could use the other argument. If this is what I'm thinking, and what did I take from him? I didn't take anything. All I took was mine. All I took was what belongs to me. I took it a little early. So if you have to be that careful with taking a bribe, not to take something this early, just a little earlier, certainly somebody that takes an actual bribe, certainly he's acting like his attorney. If you have some type of personal affiliation, personal, slant towards this individual, that's sheikhad. That is real sheikhad. That's real bribery, and you're not going to be able to see the other person's side of the case.
But even if you knew this guy in reference to under his employ, I mean, he had the guy deliver it normally, and it's
on Fridays,
but it's normally his own food.
Produce, sure.
Right, but because he had this close relationship just to this guy in general, that's not disqualifying? I guess not, right?
That's just a partnership. He does work for him. He does work. It's not,
right.
If anything, I would think that he might have, usually with partners, you don't have this.
I see.
But this is what the Talmud seems to imply, that just by bringing it a little early, that was already enough to make him, to disqualify him. There was a teacher giving a major exam, and upon collecting the test, she noticed a little bill attached to the under the test. It was $100, and there's a little note that says $1 per point. $1 per point. So the teacher returned the test with $40 change. $40 change. Okay. Now, based on all of this, we'll understand something profound about what just happened in the story of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Bnei Tzlafchad and the daughters of Tzlafchad. Why did Moshe resolve immediately to go to Hashem? Instead of deliberating over the case himself and then saying, you know what, I can't really figure it out, I'm not sure what the halach is, I'll go to God. Instead, he said, immediately I'm going to go to Hashem. Why? There must be something profound about this. And there is. You know what the reason is? If you take a look carefully at the text that we just read earlier at the beginning of the class, in text number 1, you'll see in the third sentence, it says, they stood before Moshe and before Elazar the Kohen and before the chieftains and the entire congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, our father died in the desert, but he was not in the assembly that banded together against God in Korach's assembly. He had died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why did they mention that? Why did they stick in, why did they insert that our father wasn't one of those who ganged up against Moshe Rabbeinu, against you? That's verbal bribery, friends. That's their way of saying, he's a good guy, he's on your team. He wasn't against you. He was on your side. He was on your side. Well, tell us what the halacha should be in this case. He died without any sons. So there's verbal bribery here. What does Moshe say? Moshe says, immediately I'm going to Hashem. I'm going to Hashem. I'm not going to even attempt to try to adjudicate this question.
Wow.
Because of it just smells of bribery. Now, you have to understand. Here we're talking about a story that happened 39 years prior. The story with Korach happened well before this happened. 39 years earlier. By then, things were forgotten, people moved on, people got older. Moshe Rabbeinu was 120, almost 120. He's just about to pass on. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet that ever lived. Perhaps the greatest human being that ever lived. And yet, Moshe Rabbeinu, with all of these qualities, he says, no, I'm not ready to take this case. Why? You said one thing. You said one small sentence over there that is verbal bribery. In text number 8, think about it. There was never anyone greater than Moshe. Moshe is the one who received the Torah from Sinai and passed it along to Yeshua, and from there onward until the end of time. Any leader in any generation draws their authority from the Torah that Moshe handed to Yeshua, and from there onward throughout the 40 generations of the Torah transmitters until our very generation. Conversely, the verbal bribery here, stemming from the fact that they mentioned how their father wasn't part of the group which challenged Moshe, is negligible. Korach's challenge occurred 39 years prior. Even while it was happening, Moshe didn't need any human backing and support to prove his case, for he relied on God himself. Indeed, that's how things turned out, as even Korach and his gang witnessed how God clearly proved Moshe right. Certainly, after 39 years, there's hardly any concern that a mere mention would be considered verbal bribery that can compromise Moshe's integrity. Nevertheless, simply because the women mentioned that 39 years prior their father wasn't part of Korach's gang who challenged Moshe, Moshe immediately recused himself from their case. Moshe made this decision to ensure that no verbal bribery would impact the absolute impartiality of the law, notwithstanding that he was the great Moshe, a judge of impeccable integrity. And friends, there's another story that happened in this week's Parsha, Parshas Pinchus, and really at the end of last week's Parsha, but it's all one continuation. And that is the story with Zimri. We know that Bilam, the evil prophet Bilam, advised the Moabites to have their daughters seduce the men of the Jewish people, and ultimately bring them to idolatry, which was really the reason why they were punished so severely. So Zimri, who is the leader of the tribe of Shimon, that apparently really took a very serious hit here, comes along with Cosby. She's the daughter of the king. She's the princess. And he brings her to Moshe and he says, she's not good. She's not kosher to be married to. How did you marry your own wife? How did you marry Tzipporah? She wasn't Jewish. Now, man, never mind. This was before the giving of the Torah. All kinds of explanations, and she converted. Everybody converted by Hamat. All the explanations aside, that's not important. But here he comes, and he challenges Moshe. So what does the Torah tell us over there? Moshe didn't know the halacha. Nis'alma mimenu halacha. Nis'alma halacha mimenu. The halacha escaped him. It eluded him. He couldn't remember what the halacha should be in this case, when this man Zimri is consorting with the princess in front of everybody, in the public awareness, public knowledge. Until Pinchus came along and said, Moshe, didn't you teach us that Kanoim pagan by that those who are zealots should go and take this guy down? So Moshe said, you mentioned the halacha, you be the one to deliver it. You go deliver it. That's what he did. He took a spear and he took care of Zimri. What's the reason why, in this case, Moshe didn't want to rule? Also here it says that the halacha eluded him. What does it mean the halacha eluded him? He didn't know the halacha. Doesn't mean he didn't know the halacha. It means that here Moshe was being challenged about his personal life. He was being challenged about his personal life. How did you marry Tzipporah? You're challenging Moshe's personal life. Moshe can't rule here. If he rules that zealots are able to take him down, that's not impartial. That's at least not going to be interpreted as being impartial. So therefore Moshe says, I'm not getting involved here. I'm not going to paskin. I can't paskin here because he's attacking me personally. In text number 10, with regard to the story of Zimri, Rashi explains that Zimri said, Moshe, is this woman forbidden or permitted? And should you say she is forbidden, who permitted you to marry Yisro's daughter? These words rendered Moshe as having a stake in the matter, and it is plausible that in this case he would not be believed to issue the appropriate ruling. So Moshe says, I can't issue a ruling. And so, Yiddishkeit, Judaism, asks us to have at least this level of self-awareness, to know what our biases are all about, to recognize our biases, to recognize what's really motivating us, at least to be self-aware of what's going on inside of us. And this is an instruction that the Torah gives us. The Torah tells us this instruction so we should know for future generations, not just something that applied to Moshe, but every person, every Jew needs to learn from this story. In text number 11, Moshe recorded the story in the written law of the Torah, which means a lesson. The word Torah, milashon ha'ira, the word Torah actually means a lesson, an instruction for us. For in this story, there is a profound lesson for every Jew in just how careful we must be to distance ourselves from any sort of bribery, even the most trivial form. And as mentioned, it doesn't matter who, even someone as great and inimitable as Moshe himself. So all this leads us to an important conversation that's important to have with regard to having a mentor, with regard to getting out of our biases, and when we have to reach an important critical decision, we have to be able to look to somebody else who's not personally involved, doesn't have any personal bias, and is able to see beyond their nose. In text number 12, Rabbi Chia bar Abba fell ill, and Rabbi Yochanan went to visit him. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Chia, do you welcome your pain? Rabbi Chia bar Abba replied, neither they nor their reward. In other words, I'm not interested in the pain, I'm not interested in the reward that might be coming for those who have to suffer pain. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, give me your hand. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan healed him. Rabbi Yochanan once fell ill, and Rabbi Chanina went to visit him. Rabbi Chanina said to Rabbi Yochanan, do you welcome your pain? Rabbi Yochanan replied, neither they nor the reward. Rabbi Chanina said to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Yochanan gave him his hand, and Rabbi Chanina healed him. The Talmud asks, why could Rabbi Yochanan not have healed himself? So the Gemara answers, they replied, the prisoner cannot free himself from jail. Ein chavush matir atzmoi mibeis asurim. Somebody who is a prisoner cannot free himself from jail. So you can't heal yourself. You can heal others, but you can't heal yourself. What's the point? We have a mandate in the Ethics of the Fathers in Pirkei Avos, in text number 13, Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Prachia, would say, assume for yourself a Rav. So we have this mandate of assuming a Rav, meaning getting a Rav. Finding somebody who we can trust, we feel we can trust, and discussing our issues with that person, and get their perspective, and help them educate us, help them guide us, help them teach us what should be our path, what we should do. I was recently having a conversation with somebody who does this, and he tells me, I found a certain individual, without mentioning any names, where or what, I found a certain individual I respect, he has certain qualifications, and he pays him $125 an hour, as if he was his counselor, as if he was his psychologist. And this individual helps him with, with the guidance, and he provides him with insight, etc. This is all within the mandate of have yourself a teacher. So this is what the Torah tells us. In text number 4a, we read a couple of interesting, 14a and 14b, we read a couple of interesting hirois, directives from the Rebbe in this regard. Here's what it says. Our sages said in the Mishnah, assume for yourself a Rav. In other words, every Jew is responsible to accept upon him or herself a mentor and follow their instructions. The reason for this is because a person is predisposed to himself, and accordingly he cannot trust himself. Therefore he must appoint a Rav, a person who he will consider greater than himself, and follow his instructions. And the Rebbe would say that it doesn't make a difference if the person is greater than you. The fact that he's another person, that already makes all the difference. In text number 14b, it should be added that if a person feels that he is great in matters of Torah and Yirah Shamayim, fear of heaven, and finds it difficult to identify a greater personality than himself, he should find a Rav of lesser stature, for one is unable to identify the appropriate advice for his own predicaments, as can another objective third party. Assume for yourself a Rav thus means, even if it is someone not fit for the title. We ought to stress the great importance of this matter throughout the year and for all time. Thus I suggested and pleaded, this was something that the Rebbe felt very strongly about. This was a talk in 1986. He felt very strongly about this idea that everybody needs to have a mentor. He says, I suggested and pleaded as a heartfelt plea, and even more so, but I have not yet found a more appropriate expression. That's how important it was to the Rebbe, that the matter be publicized in each and every place. It is most worthy and appropriate that every single Jew, man, woman, and child fulfill the Mishnah's directive of assume for yourself a Rav. From time to time, they should go to that Rav and assess their position in divine service. Doing so will surely cause an increase in all positive and holy matters for every Jew, constantly increasing in positivity. And this is relevant even for people in positions of authority. In text number 15a, someone who is a rabbi or halachic authority must also fulfill the Mishnah's directive to appoint a mentor for himself. And even more so, inasmuch as he is a rabbi who renders halachic decisions that impact multiple Jews, it is doubly important for him to fulfill the directive to find a mentor, as this is a matter not only relevant to him, but to the public at large. So you see here, and this circles back to our discussion about Moshe Rabbeinu, just as Moshe couldn't trust his own biases, possible biases, so too also any Rav, any leader, needs to have another Rav. And that's where you find the expression, a rabbi's rabbi.
Right.
Okay? And what do we need to ask this rabbi? Or what do we need to ask this mentor, even if he's not a rabbi? In text number 15b, even after fulfilling the Mishnah's directive to find a mentor, the way he translates this is quite amusing. He says, the smarty pants, but that's the way the Rebbe used to always call him the Klugenker. Klugenker is the smart guy. The smart guy. Who's the smart guy? Meaning the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Comes by with new great ideas. And he says, listen, not everything must be shared with your mentor. The Mishnah simply directs you to find a mentor, but it doesn't say which questions you have to bring before your mentor. So says the evil inclination. This is what you should do. When it comes to questions that you're certain your mentor will provide the answer you want, go right ahead and ask. If it's questionable whether or not your mentor will provide the answer you want, there's room to question if you should run to them right away or perhaps push it off to tomorrow. And if it's a question that you're certain your mentor will not provide the answer you want and evade your comfort zone, you definitely don't need to run to your mentor. Why stick your head into a pot of boiling water? Let it wait a little bit until tomorrow or even later. So basically you get the point. We can't fool ourselves. And the Rebbe was very well aware of how people would fool themselves. And he's telling us here, no, everybody has to have a mentor, and you discuss everything, even those things, especially those things you don't want to ask a mentor. Those are the things you have to ask the mentor. It's not just the things that you want to ask your mentor. You know your mentor is going to give you the answer you want to hear. You have to share those questions that you're not sure of. You're really not sure of, and you may not get the answer that you really want to have. Sometimes we want to have an answer that doing whatever we're doing up until now is perfectly fine. But the mentor might not tell us that. The mentor might tell us that we have to change course. The way we're going is not in order. And so we have to ask our mentor everything and lay the whole thing out in front of the mentor, let the mentor decide. And of course, this circles back to the point of the beginning of the class, which is we have to be well aware that we are people who have biases, and we have to be able to rise above that. We have to be able to transcend those biases, transcend whatever inclinations we have in our decision making, and act appropriately. So that is the lesson for tonight. Thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you everybody for watching us online. All the best.